You're sassy.
Is that better?
The sun, yeah.
Good.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Did I print enough? Or do I need to print more of the sheets?
There's more back here.
And this is just the one, right? The one that says week 4 handout.
Does anyone need that?
Okay. I can always print more. Yeah. So June 8th, we'll have also a time to reflect together on this series. We'll see if we have time to reflect as well today. And then I'm thinking the week after that, June 15th, to redo my immigration and the Old Testament course that I did for you all, because that was the only one that wasn't live streamed, partly because I didn't think about it. And the feedback that some of y'all gave me, it's easy to set up. So I'm hoping to, instead of me recording in my office to a camera, to just lead the class once again, especially if you missed the first one. We'll do that together. And then that way we can kind of put the whole YouTube series and Facebook series kind of together for that, for the whole immigration series. So as we conclude today, the actual lecture part of the series, we're going to be turning to the present day realities of the U.S. immigration system. As a recap, in earlier sessions, we explored biblical teachings on welcoming the stranger. We heard about migration happening in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And then, of course, the history in the U.S. of immigrants. Today, we examine how the immigration system actually works, which is, I'm doing as best as I could of a quick recap of how it actually works. We'll get there. Its pathways, limitations, and recent changes, and so that our compassion can be informed by the truth here. This narrative will explain the major immigration paths in the U.S., the structural bottlenecks that often thwart family unity and justice, and recent policy shifts that impact immigrant rights. As before as well, throughout my lecture, I will aim for clarity and honesty about injustices or failures without a partisan bias, as much as I can. Understanding these realities will help us to reflect on how our faith community can respond with wisdom and love. And so let's begin, right? I think a common refrain is, why not just do it the legal way? So let's talk about the legal way, the pathway to citizenship. So we have major pathways in the U.S. immigration system. The first is asylum. Asylum is a protection for people who are already in the United States or at the border who meet the definition of a refugee, right? They have a well-founded fear of persecution in their home country, as an example. Asylum seekers can apply once in the U.S. or upon arrival at a port of entry. And if they're granted asylum, they can live and work here. They may eventually apply for a green card, typically after 1 year, and then down the road, citizenship. Due to humanitarian crises, there you go, the latter. Many thousands apply for asylum each year, which has led to a significant backlog of cases awaiting decisions, right? Both in asylum offices and immigration courts.
Well, you want to explain what a green card allows?
So a green card is a permanent, so we call it green card, and we do have a show and tell around here. I had one of these too growing up. It's we call it green card because it's green. Right, a permanent residency card is the official word. A PRC. Permanent residency allows you to do all the things except vote. Trying to think of anything else, right? No jury duty. Hey, there you go. Yeah, right. You don't have all the rights of a citizen, but permanent resident allows you to
And it allows people to work.
work. Yes, yes. So since I'm focusing specifically on immigration pathways, but this is a really good question. To work, right? If you want to work, you can get a tax ID number. So whether you have status or not, and then specifically if you don't have status, if you're not a permanent resident, your case is backlogged. You're waiting on your status for your refugee case. Yeah, you can get a tax ID number. You may have heard this, that immigrants pay millions of dollars in taxes, really in the hopes as well that when they were to apply for a permanent residency card through, again, the immigration pathways, that they would be able to showcase to the court that they have been contributing to the American taxpayer system. But to be very clear, even though we get, it might be billions, but I didn't put this as part of my lecture, but they pay millions, if not maybe billions. If someone has Google, just look it up. We'll start there. But they don't get access to the Social Security, all those elements that they pay into. So it really is, they pay into it for many of them to then be able to showcase that they're contributing to the American system. So there's a way for them to work. Some states, it's a way for them to contribute while they're working to the tax system.
Illegal for them to work. They can't work. They can own a company, and the company can have the tax ID and pay taxes. But they can't work, so they have to finagle somehow so that they employ other people to work. You understand? And
No, so the personal tax ID number, that instead of getting an actual, like your Social Security number.
Not in Florida, you cannot. No.
So that might be different, and so it might vary by state.
Because if you are not employment authorized, you cannot work, and it's illegal for you to work. If they get you working, it's against the law.
State by state? Trudy, state by state, every state different?
So this is, okay, so I'm looking this up right here. The undocumented tax ID number, right, titled ITIN, the Individual Taxpayer Identification Number, is given to individuals as a tax processing number issued by the IRS to individuals who are not eligible for a Social Security number, but need to file taxes or for other federal tax purposes. Right, so this is
like people that, let's say, foreign investors make money on their investments, they need to file taxes, but working, I mean, actually holding a job is illegal.
okay.
Without what?
Okay, so yes, to clarify, like when you're given, so if you are here without documents, right, you don't have the legal, in some states, the legal right to work, you can still receive a tax identification number to pay taxes on the work you do, on the money you get paid, right? So this is a way that I know, because I grew up around dairies, right, in Central Valley, California. They'll have an ITIN number to then showcase to the courts if they're going through the process that they've been paying taxes, even though they may not have the legal documentation to be employed. Yeah, right, and that could offer a little bit more protections, but you can get an ITIN issued to you.
So the tax ID comes from.
Yes. Yes.
11.7.
Yeah, 11.7 billion. Yeah. So I'm seeing here, right, it estimates there's The estimates here for tax contributions go from 11.7, and 2022 it was estimated 96.7 billion. Yeah, you said billion, right?
Yeah.
So 2022, I'm seeing here undocumented immigrants through the ITIN number, right, paid $96.7 billion. Okay.
I bet a lot of people don't make
Yeah, that's reinvestment.
No, so it's not just no, Trudy, it's not just investment. Like if you're working at a dairy and you're getting paid by a dairy owner, right? They're giving that monies to through their ITIN.
But then you were a guest, then you were somehow.
This has nothing to do with with documentation or not. You can get a tax ID number for the purposes of
You can, but it does say it's available to certain aliens. So there has to be some sort of, maybe the migrant workers get a tax
Now it
ID.
says it's just for. that don't have a
those who don't have social security number.
They're not gonna come find out, are you a wealthy investor who has money coming in, or are you working?
But it's illegal, like when I asked for political asylum, they said, okay, we'll process your claim within 3 months and get back to you. But years went by and nothing happened.
Yes.
And
So there's you're mentioning something very specific. The legal right to work is different than receiving a tax ID number. Okay. Anybody who does not have a social security number, the government wants our money, right? So if you don't have a social security number, you can get an ITIN. I'm also looking at my accountants over here, right? To pay taxes. This is a way that many people are able to pay taxes that is a number connected to their identity. So if they ever get into the immigration court system down the road, they can prove that even though they did not have a legal right to work, they were contributing into our tax system. Okay, is that clear? That went down a rabbit hole I was not expecting, but it's a good one. It's a good one, right? Because there's many, we're talking about billions of dollars here of, we're looking at between 11 billion in 2015. I'm seeing 96 billion in 2022. $96 billion of undocumented money through the ITIN system. And not a social security number system, and they're not accessing benefits through any of that, right? There was another thing I was going to say there. I'm just going to keep going. Yeah, that's the tax ID system. Is that helpful? I know that on the topic of state laws, some state laws, right, really want to go after people who hire undocumented workers. Some state laws are a little bit more flexible. There's even some states, like when I was serving in California, we had just passed the state law that undocumented people could get a license, but that the license specifically said, like in a big marker, this is not a legal ID, right? That this is not legal identification, but it's a driver's license. So one, they're taught how to drive. They're already on the roads. They're taught how to drive, the laws of the US on driving, and then specifically the non-legal identification, but a license was able to get them enrolled into insurance, car insurance. Because what happens if you get hit, right, by another person who is undocumented, so they don't even have the capability, if you were outside of California, to get car insurance, right? So California is like, we're going to put a big border on the license, so it's very obvious. It's not legal identification. It does not say you're a resident or a citizen, but you have then the right to be able to get car insurance and be on our roads legally, right? And there's people who fought this, but it was just like, do we all want to be safer knowing who's in the roads / are insured? Do you have a question? Or
I just want to share something. When I moved from Canada to here, I got the resident card, and I was allowed to work after a year. I didn't have any information for her, but they told me to get the resident card, move to California, wait 1 year, and they were on. And then after that, I got my social security. That was like maybe I was age. It was like 3 years when I moved to California. You got
Oh,
the list, and then I got.
So she's sharing about just kind of how she was allowed to work after a year when she moved from Canada here and got the legal resident card, the permanent resident card. And that was around my age. Here, let me go through the pathways because I'm going to go through each one of these. Yeah. Okay. Bringing us back. We heard about asylum. There's significant. All right. That's if you're at the border or in the United States and you meet the definition of a refugee. Asylum seekers in the U.S. can apply in the U.S. or upon arrival at a port of entry. If you're granted asylum, you can eventually go through the green card, the resident card, permanent resident card process, and then later citizenship. But due to humanitarian crisis, many thousands apply for asylum each year, which has led to significant backlog. You'll see there, around a 3 to 6 year wait. Refugee status is a little bit different. A refugee is someone outside their home country who is unable or afraid to return due to persecution for reasons such as race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion. Refugees apply and are vetted from abroad. So that's different than asylum. Refugees are apply and are vetted from abroad, often with referrals, from the UN or US embassies. Each year, the president, in consultation with Congress, sets a cap on how many refugees the US will admit. For example, the current presidential determination is around 125,000, though in recent years, the number actually brought in is much lower. Refugees who are approved undergo extensive security screenings and then enter the US through the resettlement program. You with me so far on how that's different than asylum? Like asylees, refugees can become legal permanent residents after 1 year and citizens after 5. The distinction is essentially location. Refugees apply from outside the US, while asylees apply from inside the US or at the border. Both statuses are based on the same legal definition of persecution, refugee, right? Then we get into the pathway called family-based immigration. Family reunification has been a long cornerstone of U.S. immigration. U.S. citizens can sponsor certain family members for immigrant visas, the green card, and lawful permanent residents, the green card holders, can sponsor a narrower range of relatives. I'm going to say that again. U.S. citizens can sponsor certain family member for immigrant visas, the green cards. And then those who have green cards, lawful permanent residents, can sponsor a narrower range of relatives. Immediate relatives of U.S. citizens, defined as spouses, unmarried children under 21, and parents of adult U.S. citizens, they're not subject to annual numerical caps, meaning there's no fixed quota on visas for these categories. Other family categories are limited by annual caps, and they're organized into preference categories. For example, a U.S. citizen's married adult children or siblings fall into the capped preference categories. And because demand exceeds supply, these family preference visas have long waiting lists, often many years or even decades, right? And we'll discuss the wait times in more detail shortly. Family-based immigration remains the largest portion of legal immigration each year, accounting for roughly 65% of new lawfully permanent residents. It reflects the U.S.'s commitment to keeping families together, though in practice, many families face long separations due to backlogs. Before I get into employment-based immigration, I totally forgot to make space on your sheets for notes. I'm so sorry I did not do that. If someone wants to go grab paper, please do. There's some in the printer room downstairs. The U.S. employment-based immigration. The U.S. also offers immigration pathways for certain workers and investors. Employers can sponsor foreign workers for permanent green cards in several employment-based, called EB, employment-based EB, preference categories. So for example, EB, employment base, EB1 is for persons for extraordinary ability or multinational executives. EB2 for advanced degree professionals, EB3 for other skilled or unskilled workers, etc. These employment-based green cards are limited to about 144,000 per year, 144K per year, including family members, including their families. Because of these caps and per country limits, which I will discuss later, highly skilled workers from countries like India or China often face years-long waits for a green card even after they are sponsored. In addition to permanent employment-based immigration, there are many temporary work visas. One well-known example is the H-1B visa for a specialty occupation, workers in fields like tech or medicine. The H-1B is a temporary non-immigrant visa, valid for up to 6 years with extensions in some cases, and is numerically capped at 85,000 new visas per year. A quota that has led to a lottery system each year because far more applications are filled than available slots. Other temporary work programs include H-2A visas for seasonal agricultural workers, H-2B visas for seasonal non-agricultural workers, and these also have numerical limits and respond to U.S. employer needs. Employment-based pathways, both temporary and permanent, are designed to bring in workers with needed skills or to fill labor shortages, but the demand in many industries exceeds the visas available, always exceeding the visas available, which then produces bottlenecks. Temporary and non-immigrant visas, not everyone who comes to the U.S. intends to immigrate permanently, right? The U.S. issues temporary visas for a variety of purposes. For example, tourist visas, right? B2 visas, business visitor visas, B1, which allows for short visits for travel or business. Student visas, primarily F1 visas, allow foreigners to stay at U.S. schools or universities. Exchange visas, J1, facilitate cultural and educational exchange programs. There's also temporary work visas beyond the H-1B that I discussed, such as L visas for intra-company transferees. O visas for individuals with extraordinary ability in arts and sciences or others. All of these are non-immigrant visas, meaning the holder is allowed to remain in the U.S. for a limited period and specific purpose, but they do not directly lead to a green card unless the person later qualifies through a separate route. Making sense so far? You can't come on a tourist visa and then hope that you'll make it a green card, right? Each visa category has its own requirements and duration. For instance, a student on an F1 visa must remain enrolled in school and can usually stay for the duration of their studies, plus a period for practical training, whereas a tourist visa typically allows entry for up to 6 months at a time. It's important to note that It's important to note that overstaying a visa, right, remaining in the U.S. longer than authorized, becomes a violation of immigration law. A significant portion, and I say this with intention, a significant portion of the undocumented population today are people who entered legally on a visa, but then overstayed. The temporary visa system is complex and often requires careful navigation by individuals, schools, employers to ensure compliance with U.S. immigration regulations. If most of them are coming by overstaying, I don't know how we build a border up in the sky, but that is the majority. And that's something, again, I'm saying that as fact. Just most of them who are undocumented in the country have overstayed their visas, the majority. TPS, the temporary protected status. This is not a visa, but rather a temporary humanitarian protection for individuals from certain countries. The Secretary of Homeland Security may designate a country for TPS, when there are extraordinary conditions, such as an ongoing armed conflict, natural disasters, or other crisis that makes it unsafe for people from the country to return. TPS allows eligible nationals of that country who are already in the U.S. to stay here without fear of deportation for the duration of the designation. TPS beneficiaries receive work authorization and protection from removal. For example, in recent years, the U.S. has granted TPS, temporary protected status, to people from countries like Syria, Venezuela, Haiti, and Ukraine due to war or disaster in those places. TPS is by law temporary, typically granted in 6, 12, or 18-month intervals, with the possibility of extensions if conditions remain unsafe. It's important to understand that TPS does not lead to a green card or citizenship on its own. A TPS holder must leave when a designation ends unless they have obtained some other legal status. Many TPS holders have lived in the U.S. for years due to repeated extensions and face uncertain futures if TPS is not renewed.
Do we know what status the farmers who are coming from South Africa?
That's a great question. Please, someone look it up. If it's TPS, that would be interesting. I feel like I heard that it was under a refugee status, right? And I think that was fast-tracked specifically by the administration, not through the immigration system, right? Yeah, thank you. If you're not familiar, this is the South Africans white South Africans given, I think, refugee status. And again, yeah, refugee status because of what was shared as an elimination of white, like persecution of white farmers in South Africa. That was a story. With fast track processing.
Palestinians and Sudanese are not considered in that category.
I think I can't look up every single thing. Yeah, I would check. Yeah, check and report back if Sudanese and Palestinians are part of TPS. Right. So there's legal things that people can do with asylum or refugee, whether they're in the country or applying from outside. TPS is something that's designated by Homeland Security, so that's different. Okay. Yeah, with me so far?
Yes, on these 8 pathways here, your comments under the caps, you indicated that some of these caps are not met in a year.
So let me get there. I'll get there. Yeah, let me go through all the pathways first.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're good. No, but hold that thought. Legal permanent residency, right? That's the green cards, signifies lawful permanent resident, commonly known as LPR status. The status allows an immigrant to live and work in the U.S. indefinitely and is a stepping stone to citizenship. People obtain green cards through various paths, through family sponsorship, employment sponsorship, refugee or asylum status, and a few other avenues, such as the diversity visa lottery, which randomly allots about 50,000 green cards annually to applicants from countries with low U.S. immigration rates. Green card holders enjoy many of the same rights as citizens. They can own property, attend school, join the military, etc. But they cannot vote in federal elections, and they can be deported if they violate certain laws. Becoming a permanent resident is often a long-awaited milestone. It means security and the ability to eventually naturalize, to become a citizen. However, obtaining a green card can involve years of waiting and backlogs, as we'll see in a second. Each year, the U.S. grants lawful permanent resident status to roughly 1 million people, right? In the year 2023 is around 1.17 million. The majority through family connections. Naturalization, citizenship. U.S. citizenship is the final step for immigrants who choose to naturalize, if that's what they wish. Most immigrants become eligible to apply for citizenship after 5 years as a permanent resident, after 3 years if married to a U.S. citizen, provided that they meet all other requirements. To naturalize, an applicant must be at least 18 years old, pass an English language and U.S. civics history exam, demonstrate good moral character, meaning no serious criminal record, take an oath of allegiance. The naturalization process is handled by U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, and typically includes biometrics, meaning fingerprints, an interview, and that said citizenship test. Once approved, the immigrant takes an oath in a ceremony, officially becomes an American citizen. Citizenship affords the individual all the rights of native-born citizens, including the right to vote, and obtaining a U.S. passport and protection from deportation. And for many, it is a profound moment of belonging. Number of naturalizations each year can vary, but in recent years, roughly 700 to 800,000 LPRs, legal permanent residents, become U.S. citizens annually. Naturalization backlogs and processing times can cause delays. For example, the average naturalization application could take over a year to process in some locations. Recently, some large-scale naturalization ceremonies were even reduced or canceled due to policy and budget changes. So that can also create some bottlenecks. Despite these challenges, millions of immigrants have successfully become Americans through this process, fulfilling the promise of welcome and full membership into their new country, right? We celebrated that, I think, in 2012. I don't remember where we went, but it was a USCIS office. Me and my sister, took that oath of allegiance in Fresno, California. It is a long-awaited moment. It was also kind of awkward because I was in college, so my permanent residency card was expired, but my citizenship was for reals, but there was a wait time to actually get the certificate, so my college didn't know what to do with me. They're like, do you lose scholarships? Like, what's going on here? And it was a really tough time, but I still got the scholarships because I was able to prove. I said, can you just be patient? I will show you my certificate. I know it says my green card's expired, but it's on its way, I promise. It's in the mail. Visa caps and structural bottlenecks, getting back to this. Understanding the numerical limits in immigration law is key to grasping why so many immigrants face long waits and systemic obstacles. The Immigration and Nationality Act, INA, sets annual caps. This is important to know, sets annual caps on many immigration categories, and also per country quotas that limit how many immigrants can come from a singular country each year. These structural limits often result in enormous backlogs, queues of people who have approved petitions, but must wait years for a visa to become available. So family sponsorship caps, right? Family-based immigration, other than immediate relatives, is limited by law. The total number of family-sponsored preference visas available each year is at least 226,000, divided among the various preference categories, F1 through F4. So in reality, the cap has been effectively locked at 226,000 level for about 2 decades. There's also a per country limit, right, on another cap. No more than roughly 7% of family plus employment visas in a year can go to nationals of a single country. Countries with large number of applicants, so think Mexico, India, China, the Philippines, quickly hit that 7% cap, causing additional delays for these specific nationalities. As a result, backlogs have ballooned. As of recent counts, nearly 4 million people are waiting in the family-based immigration queues abroad, not counting those already in the US awaiting to adjust their status. That means millions of close relatives of Americans, right? Millions of close relatives of Americans are waiting for years or even decades for their chance to reunite. For example, a US citizen's siblings, right? A US citizen sibling falls into the F4 category, which is heavily backlogged. The typical wait for a sibling's green card is on the order of 15 plus years and can exceed 20 years for those from high demand countries. Am I making sense? You hear that? So if you got a sister and you're a citizen from some specific countries, 15 plus years. Where am I? So currently, siblings from the Philippines. So hear this. Currently, siblings from the Philippines began their process in the late 1990s or early 2000s are now only becoming eligible for visas right now, today, illustrating waits of over 24 years in some cases. Even other categories are slow. A U.S. citizen's unmarried adult son or daughter, F1 category from Mexico, for instance, might have filed papers in the early 2000s and is still waiting for a visa in 2025. These extraordinary wait times impose significant hardship. They keep families apart, missing milestones like weddings or graduations, and some petitioners or beneficiaries die before the visa is even available. Immediate relatives of U.S. citizens, spouses, minor children, parents, thankfully do not have to wait for an annual visa slot. Their category is uncapped. However, they still face processing delays, as we heard, due to bureaucratic backlogs. It typically takes over a year, sometimes 1.5 to 2, for a U.S. citizen spouse abroad to complete the process and receive the green card, even though there's no quota number required. In short, the demand to immigrate those family ties far exceeds the supply of visas. Congress has not updated these caps in decades. And I want you to make sure you heard that correctly, like Congress as in not partisan, just the body of people, right? Has not updated the immigration system in decades, despite changes in population and immigration patterns. This is why many legal immigrants resort to long years of waiting, or in frustration, some might overstay visas or attempt other avenues because the authorized path is so arduous. Employment and other caps. Employment-based green cards are capped at $140,000 per year worldwide for the principal workers and their immediate family members. The number was set by law in the early 1990s and has not changed, remained largely unchanged. Just like family categories, employment green cards are also subject to 7% per country cap. This has led to famously long waits, particularly for Indian and Chinese professionals in fields like technology. For instance, an Indian engineer in the EB3 category might well wait over a decade for a green card, even if they have a stable job and an approved petition, simply due to the country quota. Some estimates and studies have projected wait times of several decades for certain Indian employment-based applicants if laws don't change. There have been legislative attempts to reform these per-country limits to reduce the backlog, such as the proposed Eagle Act from the representative in North Dakota. But as of 2025, the caps remain in place. Apart from green cards, many temporary visa categories also have numeric limits. The most notable is the H-1B professional work visa. The Congress limits new H-1B visas to 85,000 per fiscal year, with 20,000 of those reserved for holders of U.S. advanced degrees. In recent years, the demands for H-1B visas have been extraordinarily high. There was about 780,000 registrations for those 85,000 slots in the year 2024. A computerized lottery then determines who gets to apply. This means many skilled workers and the companies seeking to hire them are simply out of luck each year due to the cap. Other temporary programs like H-2B seasonal work visas also have annual caps. So for example, H-2B, it's 66,000 per year, split between summer and winter seasons, and those slots often fill in quickly. The diversity visa lottery is another example of a numeric limit. By law, 55 diversity green cards can be issued each year, though effectively around 50,000 actually get issued after adjustments. Millions of people worldwide entered the lottery for those 50,000 spots. In some, structural caps and quotas acts like valves. Okay, so this is a very complex system. I'm hoping it's making sense so far. But the structural caps and quotas act like valves controlling the flow of immigration. They were put in place to ensure diversity, right? So I wasn't making any claims on those caps. They were put in place for diversity and fairness, preventing one country from dominating another, inflows, and to regulate the volume of immigration. But in practice, the fixed number that was set in the 1990s has not kept up with global population growth or U.S. economic demands. The mismatch has produced decade-long backlogs that frustrate the very goals of family unity and economic opportunity. Families that legally apply to reunite may be separated for half a lifetime. Employers that want to hire needed talent often cannot secure a visa for them in time. The immigration system structure, in this sense, often fails to meet reality and creates temptation for extra legal workarounds, or simply inflicts hardship on those who earnestly follow the rules. These are not partisan statements, but observable outcomes of policy choices. And many observers across the spectrum acknowledge the system is deeply backlogged and broken in those regards. Okay? Which is to say, there are many who are attempting to do it the legal way, the legal weight. Legal way, the legal weight. Their status becomes illegal because of a broken system, because they might have to wait 15 to 20 years. Ready to go into recent policy shifts? The clock's not working. Good. Okay.
Not illegal, undocumented.
Yeah, their status becomes illegal because of a broken system, in quotations. All right, recent policy shifts and enforcement realities. This is since 2021. Since 2021, there's been significant shifts in immigration policy and enforcement priorities, such some expanding opportunities, others raising concerns about due process and justice. So here we highlight a few major recent developments that affect the realities immigrants face today. First, the arrest at sensitive locations. Until recently, U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement, known as ICE, well done. They're almost like Presbyterian, they like their acronyms. Until recently, ICE followed a quote-unquote sensitive locations policy. And that sensitive location policy dates back to 2011. That generally avoided enforcement actions at places like schools, hospitals, or churches. Houses of worship were considered sanctuaries from immigration raids, right? The sensitive locations policy. However, that policy was reversed in 2025. In January 2025, the administration rescinded the sensitive locations guidance, explicitly allowing immigration officers to arrest and detain people at previously off-limit locations, including churches and other religious spaces. DHS, who knows that one? Oh, good. DHS officials justified the change by saying that serious criminals should not be able to hide in churches or schools. For faith communities, this change is striking. Activities like attending mass or seeking shelter at a church no longer provide any protection from ICE. Several state attorneys generals and religious groups have responded by issuing guidance on how churches can handle ICE agents and reaffirming commitments to provide sanctuary, but the legal shield that once existed in that policy is gone. This shift means immigrants, even those with no criminal issues, may feel afraid to even go to church or send their children to school for fear or arrest. It represents a dynamic change in enforcement ambiance, effectively saying no place is off limits for immigration arrests now. And I will note here, our denomination has joined a lawsuit to fight this. The argument is it goes against the freedom of religion if people are afraid to go to church. Right? I say that.
Executive order.
So this is not no, because this was no, it wasn't law. It was a policy that ICE had. So a policy that ICE had on sensitive locations policy, and now that
Rescind it.
you just rescind the policy. It's not a legal thing. Yeah, right. So in theory, ICE could have still gone into sanctuaries if needed, because there's no law prohibiting that. But there was an internal policy saying we have sensitive locations, hospitals, churches, schools. So a policy in the sense of not a law. Is that helpful? Right, which is why now the legal lawsuit is a little tricky, because they're saying if you're rescinding that policy, that might interfere with the freedom of religion if people don't feel safe to go to church, right? The PCUSA has joined, I want to say 26 other denominations. There's a statement on this, both on our PCUSA denominational website, and I think the church's Facebook, I posted this when the state clerk of our denomination signed that petition. Again, just for awareness. And our state clerk does not speak on behalf of churches. She speaks on behalf of her office, her role at the General Assembly. That distinction is different. It's different than like if a bishop spoke for a Catholic church, right? And there are bishops that sign those pieces, right? Anyway, now there's also faster deportations and detentions without due process. The government has expanded mechanisms to deport individuals rapidly in ways that bypass the courts. One major tool is expedited removal, which allows ICE or Border Patrol to deport certain undocumented people without a hearing in front of an immigration judge. Historically, expedited removal was used primarily near the border for people who had recently arrived within the last 2 weeks. In 2023 and 2024, this was greatly expanded. Now, anyone found anywhere in the US who cannot prove at least 2 years of continuous presence can be subjected to being expedited removal, excuse me. In practice, this means an immigrant who has lived here, say, for 18 months and gets stopped by ICE might be summarily removed from the country without ever seeing a judge if they can't quickly produce proof of their U.S. residency duration. This policy raises obvious due process concerns, since people with deep ties or even potential legal claims might be deported abruptly. A good example of this, we have seen this through the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, a legal resident deported to the El Salvador mass prison. Y'all remember this?
Yeah.
Okay. I talked about it in one of my sermons because it was, right, yeah. He's in El Salvador. Even though he has legal protection from deportation specifically to El Salvador, and his wife found out he was there when she was watching TV, right? Regardless if he actually does or does not have a criminal background, we know on paper he has legal protection from being deported specifically to El Salvador, and expedited removals. You know, the lack of due process is one of the major concerns here. In addition, we've seen increasing detentions of immigrants who do have legal status or pending legal status. For example, in late 24 and 25, foreign students who have maybe those education visas, and even some green card holders were caught up in a new initiative targeting individuals deemed threats, in quotes, under a vague foreign policy rationale. The government launched an AI-enabled program to scan international students' social media for certain political or religious content. As a result, by April 2025, about 1,500 student visas have been revoked. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stating that 300 student visas were revoked in March alone. And several students and scholars were detained or put in removal proceedings for alleged support of groups that government considers hostile. In one highly publicized case, a Columbia University graduate student, a legal permanent resident from Palestine, was arrested and held in ICE detention without clear evidence of wrongdoing, apparently because of his political activism. He was detained for weeks while lawyers fought for his release. And these instances show an increased attention of people who have not committed crimes, including those on valid visas or green cards under broad pretexts like national security. I hope you hear that. I'm not saying this with any judgment call, just like this is the rhetoric, this is what we're hearing, right? The fundamental issue is a lack of fair process, I would say. Visas revoked with little explanation, individuals locked up without a chance to properly defend themselves. Attorneys and advocates argue that this trend violates basic due process and even constitutional rights, but that's happening right now with our current policies. In short, the climate has become more enforcement heavy with fewer opportunities to plead one's case before being expelled or detained. There's also been an erosion of due process in immigration courts. Several recent legal cases and policy decisions have affected the rights of immigrants in detention in court. In June 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision that immigrants do not have a right to periodic bond hearings when held in immigration detention. In other words, the government can indefinitely detain certain non-citizens, such as those with prior removal orders or certain criminal issues, without automatically providing them a day in court to argue for release. This upheld the government's power to hold people for months or years as their case lingers, with detainees bearing the burden to file their own petitions for a hearing. Following that, there have been ongoing legal battles in lower courts. Notably, in 2024, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, covering New York, ruled that detaining green card holders for extremely long periods, in the cases before it, 7 months and 22 months, without a bail hearing can violate the Fifth Amendment's due process clause. The court stopped short of declaring a firm time limit, but said that after around 6 months of detention, serious due process questions arise. This conflict between courts means the issue of prolonged detention is unsettled. Some detainees might get relief in certain jurisdictions, but others won't. Another recent policy from the Executive Office for Immigration Review, which runs the immigration courts, directed judges to more aggressively clear the dockets, even allowing asylum cases to be dismissed without a full hearing if the claim is deemed legally deficient. Critics argue that the fast-tracking of deportations undermine due process, especially for asylum seekers who often lack lawyers and struggle to prepare evidence. Indeed, observers note that these measures are destabilizing the immigration court system and undermining basic due process. In practical terms, immigrants face a court system where judges are under pressure to process cases rapidly, fewer people get days in court, and higher courts have made it harder to contest detention. All of this can feel very alien to our normal expectations of justice. Remember that immigration proceedings are civil, not criminal, so many constitutional protections, like a guaranteed lawyer or a speedy trial, don't automatically apply. The net effect is fewer safeguards for immigrants at the very time enforcement is ramping up. Which leads me to go into cuts to legal aid and lack of counsel. One of the stark realities of U.S. immigration proceedings is that immigrants do not have the right to a government-provided attorney. Y'all got that? Unlike in criminal court, where an indignant defendant gets a public defender, in immigration court, you must hire your own lawyer or find pro bono legal help. Otherwise, you go unrepresented. As one report put it plainly, in immigration cases, unlike in criminal cases, lawyers are not provided by the government. About 63% of immigrants in removal proceedings currently have no lawyers, and the odds of success in cases like asylum drop dramatically for those without representation. This long-standing gap has been exacerbated by recent policy changes. In early 2025, the administration terminated federal funding for legal services that had been assisting immigrants, including a program that provided lawyers or legal advice to unaccompanied minors, children who arrive at the border without a parent. So approximately 26,000 unaccompanied children have been receiving assistance from that program, which was ordered to continue by a court, but the government cut it anyway. The loss of funding means that many nonprofit legal clinics are scaling back, and thousands of children now must face complex court proceedings alone. So it's that unimaginable scenario, and let me just say it plainly, kids, even toddlers to 4 years old, are standing in court without a lawyer. Who's on?
Where are,
Someone's phone's ringing. Here,
where are these
is that
children?
is that your phone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where are these children?
At immigration courts around the US.
Physically?
Yes, physically. That's a cool ringtone. All right, let me finish. So, an unimaginable scenario, kids, even toddlers, standing in court without a lawyer. They're expected to somehow navigate asylum law or other relief on their own. Similarly, other vulnerable groups like traumatized asylum seekers or long-time residents with mental illness often have no counsel. So faith-based and charitable organizations do try to fill the gap, running legal clinics and volunteer lawyer programs, but the need vastly outstrips the help available. The denial of legal representation combined with fast-paced court dockets means many immigrants are deported without fully understanding their rights or presenting their case. This is, I would say, a justice issue hiding in plain sight. Unlike in TV court dramas, there is no public defender in immigration court. The judges and ICE trial attorneys move ahead whether or not the person has counsel. Recent reports have decried the situation as fundamentally unfair, especially when lives are on the line for asylum seekers, right? Because they're fleeing persecution, or children's futures are at stake. Yet reform efforts, like proposed legislation to guarantee counsel for children or other vulnerable immigrants, has not yet succeeded. As people of faith concerned about the vulnerable, this aspect, the lack of guaranteed legal help, is a sobering reality to grapple with. Each of the above shifts and issues, enforcement in churches, summary deportations, cartel due process, loss of legal aid, paints a picture of an immigration system under strain and often failing to uphold ideals. Policies have swung back and forth in the past few years. The administration that took office in 21 initially set more lenient enforcement priorities, focusing on serious criminals and instructing ICE to avoid sensitive locations. And then court challenges and the new administration reverse measures. It keeps going back and forth with a lot of the administrations. The result, as of May 25th, 2025, there's stuff that happened even over the weekend. So I guess this is May 23rd when I finish the script. 2025 is an environment where enforcement is aggressive, safety nets are thin. It's not an exaggeration to say that many immigrants, whether here legally, undocumented, quote unquote, illegally, or in legal limbo because they're waiting, they feel a sense of anxiety and uncertainty about their future in the US structural injustices, like those decade-long backlogs or children facing court alone, compound that anxiety. As a church community, friends, being informed of these realities that are very complex is the first step on top of our biblical theological foundations that we have done and knowing the history. There are important steps in discerning how to respond. We strive to avoid partisanship, but we do name the injustice when systems or policies cause unnecessary suffering. The immigration system's failures today, not just don't mean today, this hasn't changed, right, since the 90s, even the cap system. Present a moral challenge. How do we balance law and compassion, sovereignty and hospitality? These are the questions we carry with us. To do it the legal way, but the legal weight. To be here, but then many things are changing. So as we end today's session, which I didn't do too bad, 6 minutes over. Your phone again, yeah. Okay, she's not here. Do you want to mute it for now? As we end today's sessions, here are a few questions to reflect on and discuss. Let's begin first with that first question. Surprising facts. What's one thing you learned about immigration system structure or policies that surprised you or changed your perception? Why did it surprise you? Who wants to go? Do we need permission that if you need to go, you can stay, but we will be here for Q&A for I'll commit to just a few minutes.
It's the 26,000 unaccompanied children. Where do they send them if they're going to deport them?
That's the question, right? I mean, and this is the question, friends, that if it keeps you up at night, go look it up, right? They're building new prisons as well, new detention centers, just to be able to detain. Yeah, I mean, this is similar to, does anybody know Michelle Alexander? She is the author who wrote The New Jim Crow. Is that familiar with anyone? The New Jim Crow came out in 2010, which was groundbreaking research and scholarship, outlining how our prison system is becoming the new Jim Crow. We build prisons, then we have to fill those prisons. And as you know, you can work in a prison but not get paid, right? That's part of the amendment that abolished slavery. You can work though for free if you're in the criminal system. So she makes
get paid a little bit.
Or get paid pennies, correct. She came to Princeton University in 2018 and was talking about immigration is also becoming the new Jim Crow. Just the way that how we value and devalue bodies, and even how we're putting a lot of money for things like detention centers for kids. Yes. Look it up. What else surprised you?
What surprised me was the number of people that come here legally, but then the system, they can't stay because their visa or whatever no longer has become expired, and now all of a sudden they're illegal and are capable of being, picked up and taken away.
Yeah, if you're ever curious, go on YouTube and look up family finally reunited, right? They're maybe they've been waiting 20 years legally, the legal process, right? And they find the 7% cap, right? They're finally from my country, and they get reunited after 20 years. And it's kind of like both heartwarming and sad to see parent and child coming back together, waiting for a very long time. If you are here, for example, undocumented and you're waiting for papers, sometimes, you haven't seen your parent in Mexico, because if you leave, you're going to have a hard time getting back, right? So then you just go without seeing anyone from family for a very long time. And then maybe you're only hanging out in one specific state because you don't want to cross state boundaries, right? When you think about the realities of it, those examples come out quite clearly. Yes. What surprised you? Or unless you want to say.
Frankly, I'm not surprised, but this material today is worthy at least of a semester in law school, or maybe a whole year. It's a very complex area. And to try to summarize this as you've done is gallant, but there are so many ins and outs that to understand it completely, it's that kind of study that would be required.
Thank you. Yeah, so you may have noticed that, I'll get to you in a second. You may have noticed that it is a very, yes, complex system. California, again, when I was serving at the first nonprofit immigration resource center in the San Gabriel Valley, which is, if you know that area, it's above Los Angeles County. California allowed, because if you know this, right, if you want to get papers, there's people who will pose as lawyers, fill out applications on your behalf, you spend money, but it's for like an E-1B visa, but you can qualify for that, right? Coyotes, like there's these people who do these things that are really neat. So California said, we will allow someone who has not gone to like pass the bar in the traditional sense, but someone who has to pass knowing our immigration legal system, and they can do immigration law, but it has to be in a nonprofit world. Does that make sense? They know that the need is so big, and because immigration law is so specific, that they even said, we'll let people be lawyers only in immigration law, only for nonprofits, because of the major need that there is. Yes, I tried my best, friends, to explain it.
You did well.
Yes, Carol.
South African farmers?
Yeah, so did someone look up the story?
Refugee status.
They got refugee status, fast tracked.
Yeah.
Yeah, as of I think it was like on Wednesday.
But I remember when all the South Africans moved here and they were doctors and dentists or just working
Yeah, so I think
years ago.
it was paired with, the administration was meeting with the South African president, right? And there was a conversation that felt a little bit. It felt a bit better than Ukraine with Zelensky and President Trump, but right, there was the facts presented that white farmers are being persecuted had not, at least from what I've seen, been substantiated or actually certified as verifiable pieces of information. Nonetheless, right, white South Africans are being, through refugee status, brought into the country for fleeing persecution, which might be a thought and theological experiment to think about why them. Anyway.
They were vetted.
Yes, right. That's part of the system. You need to vet them. Yeah. Here and here.
Just quickly, last week we had a conversation with the lady who is from South Africa. White is from South Africa, and her brother is a farmer in South Africa. And she says, she stated that, yes, conditions are very bad. However, it has nothing to do with you being white or black. It has to do with poverty. Poverty is so bad in South Africa that people resort to raiding farms. So it's a poverty issue. It has nothing to do with race. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Okay. What else? What else surprised you?
One question I have, how many people on the temporary issues can serve in the military?
I think only if you're a legal resident can you serve in the military.
Because I know people that are not citizens do serve.
Oh, you're right. No, yes, you're right. Yes, right. There's some people who will go into military service with the hope and the prayer that when they serve can become legal permanent residents.
So
It
we have,
used to be, I think, because my cousin did it years ago.
Yeah, so it might be done through. Yes, but they're having cases where undocumented immigrants joined them, who like, y'all remember the Dreamer movement? Like, right. So young people who are like, have been here since 2 years old, who consider themselves American, right? Some of them may have gone into the military and then became permanent residents because of service. It's not a promise that actually happens, but yes, that is something that has occurred. Yes, Don.
In reference to this conversation, when I was in the military back in 1960, a large act was passed for Hungarian refugees. And if they would serve 5 years in the United States military, then they would get citizenship. And I suspect some of those kinds of acts still exist or are created under certain situations.
Hmm.
But you have to have some sort of legal status.
Not what I just talked about, Judy.
I know, that was a while ago, that's how you.
So thank you. That's a really good question then to consider together, because as I said, it has not changed since the 90s. And hearing, do you see any connections between these immigration realities and experiences in your own family history or community? For example, stories of ancestors immigrating under different rules, or immigrants, facing challenges today. Thank you.
Well, my mother married an American. She was from Germany, but that had to be in the 1930s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this 1990s law is a lot different. What else?
I have Native American family that still don't have all the citizenship issues that we have, even though they've been in the country longer than any of us.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother ball.
What else?
So, yeah, that bothers me. Native Americans do not have automatic citizenship by birth like at least right now.
Yeah,
Everybody else has.
that's a great question. Do Native Americans have citizenship? I would say yeah. Well, and similar to, like, I don't know how many of you all know that this also citizenship also includes our colonies. That's not the official word. Like
Territories.
our territories. Thank you. Colonization. Colonialism. So like Puerto Rico, right? If you all recall, is a U.S. territory. So they are citizens, right? And there's a lot that migrate, for example, to New York, called New Yorkers, right? Which I was part of a New Yorker church, right? A lot of Puerto Ricans, a lot of Borinqueños were citizens, right? Hence why when hurricane, I don't know, passed by, Ian goes through Puerto Rico. I mean, they're one of our territories. So
Can they vote?
Yeah.
they can vote in the U.S. if they move to the U.S. Puerto Rico as a territory does not have representation or voting.
They have representation, but they can't vote.
They can't vote in Congress, correct? They can vote in federal elections. They don't have representation in Congress.
They have
Correct.
representation, but they represent.
They don't. They have voice but not vote in Congress.
Yeah.
They are U.S. citizens. Oh my goodness, this is a great example of how complex it is.
As our Native
That's the
American.
big shock. That it is so complex and it's all we're becoming more aware of it. And can it be fixed? That's the big shock. It is so complex.
Yes, can it be fixed? I think this is also why when we did the U.S. immigration history last week, it's one of those that, right there's been times where coalitions from across the aisle come together, and I think you may have noticed that, like, even was it last year, there was a bill that was bipartisan because there's an awareness that this needs there needs to be fixes because it's just so broken, right? Yes, and the complexity of it kind of. How many of you all like when things are just clear? Right? And when it becomes clear like mud, does everybody enjoy the nuance when that occurs? Right? It's tricky when you get like the immigration history. All right. I hope that you can see how this is being scaffolded, built upon itself. Old Testament, New Testament, they don't have like these caps per se. But there's anti-immigrant sentiments in both the old and new, right? So we're building on that U.S. immigration history, and now to this. It makes it a very complex picture, And I would invite you to let that complex picture kind of sit when you think of how you navigate our faith and our action.
It seems to me that a lot of people don't want any new people come into the country, and this is what you can use to win elections.
Yes, right. I think we talked about fear.
Are people really welcome to newcomers?
John, who was your father?
So let
Oh, the Kampapa family, Guatemala.
Look at your house for a while.
Yeah. That was when we had the church relationship back and forth. Lucas Sosa was the man. Lucas Sosa. And I sent a Christmas picture. Well, the sister church was the Presbyterian Church of Guatemala. But that's a whole nother story, folks.
Yeah, I'm gonna close this and pray because I also want to say, I know the live stream is going to end here soon. Thanks for all those online. If you want, who wants to do a little wave for them? Just thank you for joining us. All right, friends, let's pray. Gracious and loving God, we are thankful for this afternoon. For Lord, I'm thankful for these people who are willing to be patient and generous with their time. Lord, for as we heard, this immigration system that creates long wait times, that is in need of fixing. Lord, that creates realities of families separated to unimaginable scenarios that we don't want to think about again. Lord, we ask that you guide our prayers, our discernment for, Lord, how we move and act in our world today. For, Lord, how we may be praying for those at the margins, for the immigrants. Lord, how we may be even called to advocate. Lord, help us to find you, knowing that you have told us where you are. Lord, we ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, friends.
Maybe somebody knows, is there a country that